And in that time, I befriended Roger Scott, who was the Capital Radio disc jockey at that time, and who was always quite entrepreneurial. And he had a contract with Westwood One Radio Network in America to make shows for American radio, syndicated American radio. And Roger got me into Paul McCartney's Buddy Holly Week party in 1986. In fact, just before that, Roger had interviewed Paul when Press to Play came out, and said, a friend of mine, Mark Lewison's got this book about the Beatles live, and Paul, you can hear him in the background, goes, Mark thingy, you know. And Roger said to him, Mark, I've got the recording somewhere, I should give it to you. Mark said something like, wonders what you think of it. And Paul said something like, oh, that's my favorite book on the Beatles.
Wow.
So when Roger then got me into the Buddy Holly Week party a few weeks later, Paul went, you're Mark Lewison, great. And from that point on, I knew Paul.
When I was pitching the book to people internally at Castle, I said that when I read the book, what I realized was that this was one of the great mythological sequences of the modern world. You know, that they were you know, it involved everything from, you know, poverty to riches, incredible success, and then, you know, blood sacrifice, death. I mean, it's a sort of Arthurian cycle played out in modern clothes.
This is the work. It's me in the studio with the arranger, and down there's a bunch of string players, and there's the conductor, and there's the engineer, and we're doing something together. And you know, I think if we didn't know before, the COVID and working from home has reminded us all of the value of being together. And I think there are many great examples of that in the history of Abbey Road, have been in the past and will be in the future.
Well, he walked in about a half an hour after we'd been sitting and talking with Yoko. And the funny thing is he just opened the door of the office a crack. And the first thing I saw was his nose sticking through and his glasses. And I started laughing as he opened the door even more. And so I said in my typical smartass way under my breath, can't you tell we're in the middle of an interview? And he started laughing. It gave him a great sense of humor right off the bat. And he immediately sat down on the love seat right next to me. And I was in awe. I couldn't believe it. There was John right next to me. It was awesome.
If you can't find something in the Beatle world, in the Beatle musical universe to love, then you're just not trying hard enough. You've just got poor taste. If in that universe between Revolution Number 9 and the unheard Carnival of Light, and Your Mother Should Know, and When I'm 64 and whatever, if there's nothing in that panoply of music that you like, ranging from hard rock to reggae to weird stuff to orchestral stuff to folky ballads, if there's nothing in there that you like, then you musically are very impoverished, I think. And so I think the narrative has changed now. And the very few, I mentioned in the book that Graham Coxon said to me that on that recreation of Please Please Me, he said, people who say they don't like the Beatles, it's sheer affectation. And I think he's right. They think on some level they're being cool to say they prefer the Rolling Stones. You're not. You're just being thick.
It's a very concentrated burst of creativity, but 69 itself, you know, they go out with a bang. There's absolutely no question. There's no sort of dwindling away. A lot of bands, you know, of course, you know, a lot of groups, lesser groups, you know, it gradually fades out, you know, and you get one lousy record after another until they finally throw it in, you know. Some groups have been doing it, you know, been putting out lousy records for decades, you know, but doesn't happen here. It's really great till the end, which is another sign of what an amazing thing the Beatles were.
And then Ed Sullivan introduced the Beatles. They came on, and I will forever remember that moment. Suddenly, all my loving started. The Beatles looked like they were having such a good time. And then I was so happy for my seat because instead of looking straight out to the audience, where their views from the stage were obscured by a lot of cameras, they were looking up to the mezzanine.
Mm.
And that was great because we were sort of overhanging a little bit, and then they looked at us. And it was just an amazing experience, but it was over instantaneously. It was so fast.
They were expected at 11 o'clock, 11:30, they hadn't arrived. 12 o'clock, there were rumors about, are they coming? Are they not coming? They're not on the boat anymore, apparently. They're in the hotel, but they're not coming. What's going on? And there was, they had sent, I mean, the palace had sent a delegation to the hotel to pick them up. And this is where it really started to go wrong, because Vic Lewis at that point was saying, look, Brian, I think it's a good idea if we go. And he said, these people are hot-headed. We don't know what they're going to do if we don't go. The British Embassy is ringing up Brian saying, look, you really should go, because it's you have no idea how much they control, how powerful they are. And he goes like, yeah, I don't care about that. We're not going, and that's it.
John Lennon had quite a chip on his shoulder about class. Some people say that's kind of down to his sort of guilt at being raised essentially middle class, but I don't know. But I mean, Tara certainly wouldn't have been his kind of guy. Like, I don't think he liked those aristos who the Stones hung around with. But he would have been aware that he was friends with Paul, and he was in the flat one night when Peter Sellers was there, Roman Polanski. This is the amazing thing about Tara's flat. It was just like it was just as a drawing point for all these people in swinging London. And Nikki said to me, like, you would wake up in the morning and the room would be full of bodies, and you turn them over. You didn't know who was a Stone, who was a Beatle, who was an Animal, who was a Kink. Like, that's kind of the scene.
We were talking about how, in the talk about the anthology, which was 5 years in the future, but Paul was talking already about, maybe we can get together and do some incidental music for it or whatever. And George came out and said, the Beatles will never get together so long as John Lennon remains dead. And I thought it was just a funny way to put it. And so I quoted that to Paul, and he said, yeah, George was in his sour period. And then he added, George's sour period has lasted for quite a while.
The further we get away from them, the more perspective we have, the more we realize that, that they are bigger than the Beatles are bigger than the Beatles somehow. It's like, Shakespeare is bigger than 16th century theatre. His cultural footprint is massive compared to 16th century, even though that's illogical when you think about it. Beatles are so much bigger than, certainly 60s pop music or British pop music in general. They've become their own thing.
Anticipation again was huge in South Australia, particularly Adelaide. We and I checked the population, the Australian Bureau of Statistics. The population for South Australia as a whole state on the Australian map was just a little bit over 1 million people at the 30th of June 1964. The police estimate is for 300,000 people lining from the airport all the way down the Anzac Highway up through the route down King William Street into the Adelaide Town Hall. But the footage supports that because they're 10 and 20 deep. And then you've got in the front of the town hall, it's absolutely a double lane road that carries traffic down the King William Street in front of the hall is 100% full of people. And how they even got their slow progress to the motorcade to the town hall is another feat of Beatlemania, really.
What do we get from George at the end? I mean, look what he became. I mean, the guy grew up and found soul and spirit and intelligence beyond any of their dreams. And so, to watch these guys morph like a butterfly, a caterpillar to a butterfly, whew, what an odyssey for me. It was great.
I didn't mention this in the book, but from time to time, John would say to me or look at me, what do you think Paul is thinking right now? And he said, John, I've only met the man a couple of times in my life, you know. We've never had any in-depth conversations. I have no idea, dude. And John would ask, do you think he thinks about me at all? The question made me sad.
Joe, it's I've been listening to this music for 60 years, okay? There are still times that, and I don't mean, I hope this doesn't sound sentimental. There are still times that the groove of She Loves You can take my breath away. You know what I mean? It comes on like thunder, right? And I think, oh my God, listen to that, right? I've been listening to backbeats for 70 years, okay? But that backbeat, right? That groove is still, is still enough to take my breath away.
Pressed the bell, door opens, there's McCartney. I mean, he caught me right on the hop. I did not expect him to open the door. And just said to me, oh, hi, Leslie, James told me a lot about you. Would like to come through? And would you like a cup of tea, please? So I said, yeah. No sugar, please. Thank you. And I sat down in this room, in this front room, with a mad dog running around me, tended to be Martha, hairs everywhere, guitars by the fireplace, colourful piano. And next thing, within 5-6 minutes, I'm having tea with Paul McCartney.
It's almost like a automatic thing. It's this weird story that doesn't need anybody to push it, doesn't need anybody to to convert anybody, doesn't need anybody to persuade anybody. It's just a story that people just fall in love with, of every culture, every generation, all around the world, every personality type. It's a beautiful thing to see.